This isn't just a presentation on trading psychology. This is an exploration into the deepest mechanisms of human consciousness as they relate to performance, decision making, and ultimately mastery itself, hence emotional mastery and discipline. This isn't about motivation or willpower. It's about understanding the systems within the mind that shape behavior, learning how to work with these systems instead of fighting them. You see, when we explore emotional mastery here, we're not talking about controlling emotion. What we're talking about is understanding the inner field from which all action emerges. And today, during this lecture, I want to show you how all of this ties into trading, not as philosophy, but as a practical inner technology. Before I begin though, I do want to ask you one fundamental question. Who is making your trading decisions? Is it the aware, conscious you? Or is it the reactive, emotional you that you don't even recognize until after the damage is done? Whatever your answer is to that question, I want you to hold it and we're going to return to that. Now, of course, I got to hit you with the why. Why does emotional mastery matters? If anything, why does it matter more than drawing these boxes and lines on them charts like y'all do and like I do? Emotion is the filter through which information is interpreted. When you're in a heightened emotional state, your perception is shared before you even realize it. When you're in fear and greed and anxiety and euphoria, you're literally not seeing reality as it is. You're seeing a version of reality filtered through emotional distortion. You're seeing it through a filtered state relative to where you are internally. So, as I've spoken before, most trading mistakes are emotional before they're technical. But let me double down on it because it's critical. Your losses are not primarily the result of bad market reads. They're the result of internal states that you haven't learned to manage. The reason why you revenge trade is not because the setup was there, but because your ego was wounded. You overtrade not because the market gave you signals, but because you're seeking stimulation or trying to make back what you lost. You don't just exit early out of your trade, not because your system told you to, but because fear whispered louder than your pain. So I want you to think about that for a moment. The very moment when precision matters most, when you need to be clear, the most disciplined, the most adherent to your system, are precisely the moments when your perception is most compromised. So when you're trading, what that means is you stop obsessively assessing your risk. You overweigh recent outcomes. You ignore your system. You distort probability. You become reactive instead of executive. If you know, you know. We spoke about this a few lectures ago. It's interesting because the hardest part of trading is not the technical analysis, it's the emotional honesty. So here we have the map of consciousness, one of the most profound teachings to me by David R. Hawkins, who is the author of one of my highly recommended books to people, is Letting Go, The Pathway to Surrender. Here he dives deep into his work on consciousness and the map of consciousness. This map of consciousness shows us the different emotional states correspond to different levels of power and perception. At the lower levels, you see here shame, guilt, apathy, grief, fear, anger. Your consciousness is contracted here, allowing you to perceive only through the filter of your internal state. At these lower levels, your field of perception is narrow. You're operating from survival mode here. Your decisions at these levels are weak, reactive, and almost always destructive to your capital and your ability to trade, of course. At these higher levels, you can see You got courage, acceptance, reason, love, peace, enlightenment. Your consciousness expands. You see more. You perceive patterns you couldn't see before. You have access to intuition, to stillness, to clarity. The market doesn't change. However, your capacity to read it does. Are you following me? Amazing. So yes, considering this map of consciousness, when you're in fear and your perception is narrowed, everything looks threatening. When you're in greed, everything looks like opportunity. Everything looks like something you can take from. When you're in courage and in acceptance or surrendered, the chart finally appears as it is. There's no bias to it. There's no duality to it. It just is what it is. It's just patterns. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the state in what you would call non-duality. Non-duality. Nothing is good nor bad. Everything just is. This is what many spiritual teachers would refer to as the ism, the isness. You ever heard of the isness of life? The isms. Ben C said, this comes because you care about money, so just stop caring about the money and you're good, right? That relates to attachment. And attachment, I'm going to touch on that soon, very soon. So I want you to tune into what I'm going to have to say about that. But yes, emotional mastery matters. It's because your emotional state is the lens, and that lens determines what you think the market is telling you. And so we're all operating on different lenses here. That's why we all can have the same strategy, but interpret the market differently. We're just all on different states of consciousness. Some of us are operating out of grief. Some of us are operating out of anger. Some of us are operating out of willingness, acceptance, reason. With all that said, though, what's highly important to note here is that mastery begins with awareness of internal patterns. You cannot change what you can't see. The trader who doesn't know they're afraid will keep acting out of fear-based patterns and call it bad luck or fucking bad market conditions. The trader who doesn't recognize their greed will keep over-leveraging, over-risking, and then call it conviction. Without emotional stability, no strategy remains consistent here. You could have the most sophisticated edge. You could have the most back-tested system, the most thought-out risk management, and you will still fail if you cannot maintain the inner state required to execute it. To execute the edge, the system, the risk management. The system doesn't fail. You fail the system, and you fail it from the inside out. But anyways, let me ask you now, have you ever tracked your emotional state before? Have you ever tracked your emotional state before, during or after your trades? Ben C said both. Do you know which emotions predict your worst decisions? Can you feel the difference in your body between clarity and compulsion? Because both states affect your ability to trade here. Ben C said fear. Flo says, sometimes my heart still pounds during a trade, even following my setup. Who said the system didn't fail? You failed the system, of course. I'm going to have something to say about that in the coming slides as well. Now, on to the next slide, the true cost of emotional reactivity. This is very costly. Emotional reactivity is costly because it hijacks the important functions of the brain responsible for the executive mind, the CEO mind. Not trying to get too scientific here, but I'll place some awareness on that matter. Prefrontal cortex, which is specifically responsible for reasoning, planning, and impulse control. and decision making. That becomes impaired under high stress. Some of these consequences in your trading, you'll see yourself chasing entries, impulsive entries and exits, cutting your winner trades prematurely, letting your losers run, revenge trading, over trading, bias toward the last trade outcome. You think you're reacting to a candle, but really what you're reacting to is past losses. You're reacting to childhood conditioning. You're reacting to identity wounds. The urge to prove something. You're reacting to your attachment to winning. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something. Yesterday's win does not earn you today's profit. Yesterday's loss does not determine today's outcome. Right now is a clean slate. Every moment you spend replaying yesterday's loss is a moment you're not seeing today's opportunity. You feel me? You feel me? Every moment you spend replaying yesterday's loss is a moment you're not seeing today's opportunity. The real cost isn't the losing trade. It's the regression of consciousness. Once you fall into unconscious reaction, you cannot trade your system. So let me get a bit esoteric here. Buddha. Let's talk about Buddha. The Buddha taught about attachment and aversion as the root of suffering. Again, attachment is the root of suffering. In trading, these show up as overconfidence after you win, and in fear after you lose. When you're attached to the pleasure of winning, you'll do anything to recreate it, including taking trades that aren't there, that aren't ready, setups that aren't there. When you're reluctant, when you're resistant to the pain of losing, you'll do anything to avoid it, including not taking trades that are there. You're so scared to lose that you don't even take the trades that you're supposed to. And this is what I would call the pendulum swing of the untrained mind. You win, you feel great, and you get reckless. You lose, you feel terrible, and you get paralyzed. You win, you lose, you win, you lose. And your behavior swings wildly with each outcome. There's no center, there's no stability, there's no consistent execution, there's duality, there's a clear split, there's good and bad, both treated as different entities. Good being treated with attachment and bad being treated with resistance. Both extremes are exploited here, leaving no room for non-duality, centeredness, control. It's interesting because the Stoics understood this deeply. My personal favorite philosopher, Epictetus, he said, let me see if I can find the quote. Epictetus, he said, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Therefore, the market will do what the market does. Wins will happen, losses will happen, volatility will happen. None of that is in your control. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. The only thing in your control is your response. And if your response is reactive, if it's driven by unconscious emotion, you've already lost. So ask yourself, when was the last time you broke your rules? And if you can remember that, my next question would be, what were you feeling right before you broke your rules? Can you name the emotion? Can you locate exactly where you felt that emotion in your body? If it was anxiety, where did you feel that anxiety? In your stomach, chest? Your back was probably hurting. These are rhetorical, by the way, and what I'm doing here is to force you to look within, to feel what I'm saying, to truly feel what I'm saying, because it's easy to conceptualize. what I'm putting down here, but to actually feel what I'm putting down here is the point of this lecture. Ben C said last Friday. Amazing. Now, as far as how the brain reacts under pressure, you see the brain's stress response. It's naturally designed for survival. It's not for analyzing financial markets. We spoke about how we're not naturally primed for this. We have to become primed for this through constant execution, through constant awareness. When the nervous system detects a threat, even if it's a financial one, it activates the sympathetic response. The threat response system overrides analytical thinking. Your brain has ancient circuits designed to keep you alive in the face of physical danger. For example, you see a lion appear, you don't stop to analyze what the fuck is going on. No. Nigga, you either run or you fight or you freeze. That right there specifically is the amygdala taking over. Your emotional alarm system. It hijacks your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational decision making, planning, impulse control, long-term decision making. But this physiological state produces faster but less accurate thinking. It produces heightened impulsivity. It reduces capacity for multi-step reasoning or even multitasking. In this state, you produce stronger emotional memory. Your emotional load increase. And what's interesting is that pattern recognition weakens under emotional load. This is detrimental for traders because trading is pattern recognition. You're trying to read subtle market structure, identify high probability setups, and execute with timing. But when your nervous system is activated, when you're emotionally activated, your ability to perceive these patterns degrades substantially. You miss what's right in front of you. You see threats that aren't there. You interpret neutral information as confirmation of your fears, once again tying it to the map of consciousness and how your internal state at the lower levels narrow your perception and negatively filters information. So your state of being truly matters here. But anyways, to continue, it's important to understand that this isn't a character flaw, it's simply biology. But even then, when you're unaware of what your body is doing, you end up making decisions that reflect the stress response rather than your trading plan. Emotional management begins with recognizing when biological processes are taking over and learning how to regulate them. But that's not even the most egregious part. The most wild part is that the mind in this state seeks relief, not clarity. When you're in an activated state, an emotionally activated state, your system just wants the discomfort to end. It doesn't care about your long-term edge. It doesn't care about your trading plan. It wants relief now, right this second, right this moment. So you exit a trade to stop feeling exit. Sorry, you exit a trade to stop feeling anxious is what I mean. You enter a trade to stop feeling left out. You move your stop loss to stop feeling wrong. You see, the constant here is that every decision becomes about managing your emotional state rather than managing your risk. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, fear itself isn't your enemy. Acting on fear is. There's a difference between feeling something and becoming it. Stoicism says, you are not disturbed by events, but by your interpretation of them. Epictetus is my favorite philosopher. But anyways, pressure doesn't ruin trades. Identification with pressure is what ruins trades. So it's your identity here, and we're going to get to identity. But anyways, to continue, It's interesting. Awareness is exactly where everything changes. This is the moment where awareness becomes a tool for self-regulation. This is the inflection point between receiving trading and reactive trading and executive trading. However, all of this comes down to one thing, and it's awareness before action. The space between stimulus and response, that is where discipline lives. Self-regulation starts with recognizing emotional activation early, not after you've already made the mistake, not after you've already blown through your daily loss limit or your maximum loss limit, not after you've already revenge traded your account down another 10%. This moment here determines whether you follow your plan or react emotionally, whether you have structure or chaos, whether you use your system or abandon it. But as far as what emotional activation actually looks like in live time in the body, and I'm sure a lot of you will be able to relate to this because you've experienced this yourself. What it looks like is you notice shifts in breath. You notice a shift in your tension, speed of thought. Your breath becomes shallow, or you're holding it all together. You can feel your jaw clench, your shoulders rise, you get a little tense. Your chest tightens, your thoughts start to speed up. They become more insistent, more urgent, and a lot more convincing. You see, this is your nervous system moving into activation. This is the early warning system. Awareness is the first step. But here's the thing. Most people are so disconnected from their bodies, so lost in their thought, autopilot, being an NPC, that they don't notice until they're already deep in reactivity. So this is why practices like meditation, breath work, mindfulness, somatic awareness, those are not optional for serious traders. And they're not some like woo-woo extra bullshit. They're foundational training for the only instrument you have to work with, which is your nervous system. You got it? Between stimulus and response, there is a space. Within that space is our power to choose our response. Because of that, within our response lies our growth and our freedom. And that space right there is awareness. Without awareness, stimulus leads directly to reaction. For example, someone cuts you off in traffic, you rage. The market gaps against you, you panic. You hit your profit target for the month, you get cocky. It's automatic, it's mechanical, it's unconscious. However, when you bring awareness into that space, when you catch the emotional activation before it becomes action, you have a choice. You can feel the fear and not exit the trade. You can feel your greed and not increase your size. You can feel the anger, the loss, and not revenge trade. You can feel the nervousness and still enter the trade that you're supposed to according to your system. Awareness doesn't eliminate emotion. It simply gives you the space to respond instead of react. You got my next favorite philosopher here, Marcus Aurelius, in his book Meditations. Some of you may have heard it, some of you may have not. There's this quote. Let me see if I can look for it. Marcus Aurelius, he wrote in Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." Very lovely quote, very relatable quote, very inspiring quote. The markets will do what it does. Your emotions will arise, but you have the power to choose how you respond. This moment determines discipline more than any rule set. You can have the most detailed trading plan in the world. You can have the most comprehensive rules. You can have the most specific criteria. And none of it will matter if you can't access that moment of choice, that awareness. Discipline is not about having rules. It's about having the awareness to follow them when every part of your being wants to do something else. That's what discipline is about. So with that, let me ask you directly, can you feel your emotions without acting on them? Can you feel fear without acting on fear? Can you feel excitement without acting on excitement? Can you sit with discomfort and let it move through you without seeking immediate relief? Without trying to escape the discomfort, without judging the discomfort? Have you ever even trained this capacity? Or are you hoping it will just show up when you need it? Bensi, this is more reflective. This is something you ask yourself. You answer to yourself. Can you sit with discomfort and let it move through you, in and out, without seeking immediate relief, without judging it, condemning it? So now here we're going to get into the nit and gritty. With that question in mind, emotional alchemy. This is where you turn raw emotion into clarity. Because it's easy to place awareness on things, but now the question becomes what to do once you are aware of what the issue is at hand. This is where we move into something profound here. Something that most traders never get to understand. Your emotions are not the enemy. The problem is not that you feel. The problem is that you don't know what to do with what you feel without being controlled by it. You understand? So let's start here. How should I approach this? Okay, so emotions carry information, not instructions. It's information, not instruction. You see, fear tells you that something feels uncertain or risky. It doesn't tell you to exit the trade. Greed tells you that something feels exciting or abundant. It doesn't tell you to double your position. Anger tells you that something feels unfair or unjust. Anger tells you that you can't put up with the loss that you just had. It doesn't tell you to revenge trade. All these information, all these feelings are just telling you information. They're carrying information, but not instructions here. The emotion is data. It's a signal from your nervous system. However, somewhere along the way, perhaps childhood, you learn to treat emotions as commands. You feel anxious, so you must act to relive the anxiety, or to relieve it instead of relive. Yes, relieve it. You feel excited, so you must act to capitalize on the excitement. This is emotional reactivity, letting the emotion dictate the behavior. Back to David R. Hawkins. He's a perfect example. He teaches about letting go. It's a technique called letting go. It's within his book called Letting Go, The Pathway of Surrender, one of my most highly recommended books. This is my own personal process, a process of surrendering resistance to what you're feeling. Most people, when they feel fear, they resist their fear. They try to push it away. They judge it. They condemn it. They distract themselves from it. They override it with forced confidence. And what happens there? the fear intensifies. What you resist persists, ladies and gentlemen. But when you let yourself feel the fear, when you drop your resistance to it, when you let it be there without needing it to go away, something interesting happens there. The intensity reduces. The emotion moves through you, and on the other side of it is clarity. So this is what I mean by emotional alchemy. You're not suppressing the emotion. You're not indulging it. You're transmuting it through awareness and acceptance. Raw emotion becomes redefined perception. Non-duality. Here's a practical technique here. Very practical. Labeling emotions reduces their intensity. This has been proven in neuroscience. When you name what you're feeling, whatever you're feeling, you name it. Oh, this is fear. This is frustration. Oh, this is impatience. You activate the prefrontal cortex, which dampens the amygdala's alarm response. The simple act of labeling creates a gap between you and the emotion. You're no longer consumed by it. You're observing it. You're not the emotion itself. You're the observer of the emotion. Hence the ability to be able to identify the emotion without identify your sense of self within it, because you're just the observer. Clarity emerges when emotion is processed instead of resisted. Processing means feeling it fully, naming it accurately, letting it move through your system without attaching a story to it. You don't need to know why you're feeling it. You don't need to justify it or fix it. You just need to be present with it. You just need to be present with your emotions. So, as for me, my own personal way of process and identification is through first understanding these two principles that I hold dearly. Number one being that I can't deliberately change my emotions. Why is that? Because that is a form of resistance. Wanting to change my emotions is a form of resistance, and what you resist persists. So there's no true processing being done when I'm attaching resistance to what is. This also leads me to my number two, which is emotion is energy and motion. When you resist, when you judge your emotions, when you are conditional instead of unconditional with your emotions, you begin to trap your emotions within. Your nervousness, your fear, your anger. These things want to escape. All your feelings want to be let go, but when you bottle them up, when you refuse to truly feel your energy and motions, aka emotions, that's when you stop the energy in motion. And when you stop the energy in motion, the energy screams louder. It grows more powerful. It screams until you finally give up bottling them. You surrender once and for all. So it's interesting because while most people are illusioned trying to escape their feelings, what I'm doing here is increasing and expanding my capacity to feel my emotions. I understand that I can't escape my emotions. I can't stop emotion, but what I can do is get better at feeling them. And through truly feeling is the only way you process your emotions. This isn't something you can think your way out of. Sure, you can disguise your emotions using thought, but the base emotion will always truly remain. You can sit there and look at your fear and try to think of happy thoughts to try to cover up the fear, but the fear is always still going to be there. You can't change that emotion. The only way out of your emotions is through. It's feeling. You can't suppress your way to success. You can only process your way to power. Facts. But as far as my actual perspective on processing, my emotions is simply like my perspective is just like simply looking at my emotions as if they're my kids. I got a son named Sadness. I got a daughter named Fear. I got a middle child named Grief, etc., etc. And so essentially all of my emotions are like little kids. You ever notice when little kids are trying to grab your attention? They're trying to get your attention and you ignore them? You ignore little kids who are trying to get your attention and they only get louder and louder. They begin to try harder and harder to grab your attention. Mind you, whole time it be about the littlest, dumbest shit. Little badass kid to call your name 50 times, non-stop, just to show you a dirty ass goldfish that they picked up from the ground that they plan on eating. The point I'm trying to make is though, when you ignore them, they persist. So the same goes with emotions. So with looking at my emotions like my kids, I look at them unconditionally. If I were a father of 6 kids, like Duke, I wouldn't have any favorites. I would treat all of my kids the same. No one is more superior than the other. All of my kids hold the same weight because they're my blood. They're part of me. That's me. They're an extension of me, sorry. So with my emotions, I look at them the same way. So essentially, whenever I have anger or any feelings that generally there would be resistance to, anytime I resistance, how it begins to feel is like when I ignore my anger just keeps calling my name. Yo, 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 yo. And it only gets louder. The more you ignore your anger, it only gets louder and more powerful. Think about people who are depressed. 9 times out of 10, they're trying to escape the sadness. And it's only perpetuating the sadness because it's keeping the energy and motion stuck. Because it's keeping the energy and motion stuck, now it's trying to find other ways to leave. It's trying to remind the cage, aka you as the vessel experiencing the emotion, yo, let me get out of here. So I'm gonna only get louder until you let me the fuck out. There's another author, Eckhart Tolle. He speaks about this beautifully. Similar, very similar. In The Power of Now, his book, The Power of Now, he talks about watching your emotions the way you would watch clouds passing across the sky. You don't identify with the clouds. You don't become the clouds. You simply observe them, arising and dissolving. Beneath the clouds, the sky, your true nature, your awareness, that right there remains unchanging. You see, the goal is not suppression. It's not to suppress your emotions, but refinement. Suppression is pushing the emotion down, pretending it's not there. Quote unquote, being disciplined by overriding how you feel. That doesn't work. The emotion never disappears. It goes underground and expresses itself in subtle ways. In your body language, in your hesitation, in your self-sabotage. I'm hitting some of y'all cores. I know. In your greed, in your fear. Refinement is different. You see, refinement is letting the emotion burn clean through your awareness. What remains after the emotional charge dissipates. It's clarity without distortion. The emotion that you resist becomes the emotion that persists. And the emotion that persists becomes the trade that you miss. Don DeMarco, let me hit that one more time. The emotion that you resist becomes the emotion that you persist. The emotion that you resist becomes the emotion that persists. And the emotion that persists becomes the trade that you miss. This is transmutation. You aren't suppressing, you aren't indulging, you're letting the emotional energy rise and pass. And what that does is it leaves behind clarity, ladies and gentlemen. To continue, as far as the states that produce consistency, states of being that produce consistency, that are conducive to your success in trading. You see, we understand now how to work with emotion. We understand the concept of allowing your emotions to be, allowing to process your emotions through just feeling it. Because the only way through your feelings, the only way out of your feelings is through it. But with that, let's look at the states of consciousness that actually produce consistent, high level execution, because this is what you're aiming for here, right? Not the absence of emotion, but the presence of clarity. So, with the states that support consistency and clarity, it would include cognitive calm, attentional control, emotional neutrality, controlled arousal, something that's not too high, not too low, stable breathing, low internal narrative, high self-regulation. And from there, you experience optimal execution conditions. In this zone, you assess, within this state, you assess risk accurately. You follow your system. You maintain patience. You avoid forcing your trades. You execute clean. You see, this is the state of flow that athletes and performers, they talk about all the time. Kobe, Black Mamba. Time seems to slow down. Actions feel effortless. There's no internal conflict between what you should do and what you want to do. They're the same thing. This state emerges not from trying harder, but from being calmer. In Zen, for example, they call this the beginner's mind. You approach each moment fresh without the baggage of past experiences clouding your perception. You see, each trade is new. Each setup is unique. You're not carrying forward yesterday's loss of this morning's win. You see, you're here now, just seeing what is. Here, you're in the state of non-duality. You experience natural evaluation, reduced attachment. And this is critical because when you're attached to being right, every trade becomes personal. And then every loss is an assault on your identity. Every win inflates your ego. I'm that nigga. I know what I'm doing. You're on an emotional roller coaster that has nothing to do with actual performance. But then when you can evaluate trades from a neutral position, when you can see a loss simply as data, as feedback from a probability-based system, you stop taking things so personally. You stop giving market outcomes the power to define your worth. And then even the Stoics, they trained this specific aspect ruthlessly, relentlessly. They practice viewing events from a cosmic perspective, recognizing that everything is neither good nor bad in itself. Only your judgments make it so. A losing trade is not bad. It's an expected outcome in a probability-based system. A winning trade is not good in a way that validates you. It's also just a part of the distribution of outcomes here. Neutrality is spacious, ladies and gentlemen. Neutrality allows you to observe without attachment. Neutrality lets the system work. And so These states allow the system to operate as intended. Your system was designed by the calm, rational version of you. It was built during times of clarity with access to your full intelligence, but it's being executed by the moment-to-moment version of you, the one who gets tired, scared, greedy, impatient, fearful. So now the question becomes, can you create the conditions for the calm, rational version of you to be present during execution when it matters the most? See, that's the entire game there. That's the entire game. And so, with that being said, completing the emotional mastery part, that's where you start to understand how to build discipline, or understanding the true extent of discipline and what it's actually about. Discipline as internal architecture. Discipline is often misunderstood as self-control or willpower. Most people out here thinking discipline is about willpower, about forcing yourself to do hard things, about grinding through resistance. See, that's not discipline, that's violence against yourself. It's not sustainable. Discipline isn't about controlling yourself. It's about becoming someone who doesn't need control. Real discipline is structured behavior, and it's anchored to a chosen identity. It's not about forcing yourself to follow the rules. It's about building an internal architecture to where following the rules is a natural expression of who you are. So it's nothing against yourself. It's just who you are. The fact that I follow these rules is who I am. But think about it this way. You don't need discipline to breathe. You don't need willpower to make your heart beat. These are automatic. They're part of your biological architecture. And while trading will never be as automatic as breathing, what it can do is become part of your psychological architecture, a natural expression of your identity rather than a constant battle with yourself. Discipline in this way is built through clear structures, habit loops, environmental design, of course, emotional regulation, and importantly, internal rules with no negotiation. For example, you got in Hermetic philosophy, there's this principle that I often go by. I'm going to get it tatted on me, I swear to God. As above, so below, as within, so without. The order you create internally manifests as your order externally. Your trading results are a direct reflection of your internal state of organization. Therefore, if you are chaotic inside, if your emotions are unmanaged all over the place, if your identity is unclear, if your routines are inconsistent, your trading will reflect that chaos. But if you're ordered inside, if you know who you are, if you're clear about your values, if you're clear about your identity, if your behavior aligns with your identity, your trading will reflect that order. That's why I've often bridged the gap between the life you live outside of trading and how that correlates to your results when you're on the charts. If you have discipline outside the charts, it's easier to access that discipline inside the charts. But this is about alignment. When your behavior is aligned with your chosen identity, there's no friction there. You're not fighting yourself. You're not fighting what you're supposed to be doing. You're not overriding your nature. You're just simply expressing it. You feel me? Y'all following me? KRD said, will there be a replay? Yes, there will. But essentially, discipline becomes effortless when your identity is stable, when your awareness is present, when your emotional charges are lower, or even when your environment is structured to support clarity. And so this is what I mean by internal architecture. It's not rules. It's not rules that you're following. It's not rules that you set for yourself. It's just a structure of being who you are. This is just who I am. And so when it comes to the word of the decade, or I can say the second word of the decade, the first word of the decade is discipline. You hear that shit everywhere. Anytime you make your algorithm on Instagram about self-help, main thing you're gonna hear is discipline. The second one is motivation. And so I'm gonna tell you why motivation fails. Motivation is overrated. If anything, relying on motivation is one of the surest paths to inconsistency. Lots of inconsistency. Motivation spikes are temporary. You watch a great trading video, you watch a Wix source, you watch an ICC, you hear me speaking, you feel inspired, you have a big win, you feel motivated. You read a book on discipline, you're ready to conquer the world. You watch an Andrew Tate video, and now you're ready to make a couple 100,000,000 quadrillion in 2 weeks after watching an Andrew Tate video. And then what happens? 3 days later, the motivation is gone. You're back to your old patterns. And you wonder what happens. Thing is, nothing happened, and that's the point. Motivation is an emotional state, and emotions fluctuate too much to depend on them. If you need to feel motivated to trade well, you're going to have massive inconsistency. Some days you'll feel it, some days you won't. Some weeks you'll be on fire. Some weeks you'll barely show up. Relying on motivation here creates inconsistent execution, and the reason why is because then you begin to act when you feel like it. You avoid action when emotions dip. Your performance becomes tied to moods. You break routines easily. Your system doesn't care if you're motivated. The market doesn't give a fuck if you're inspired. They require consistency, not enthusiasm. Motivation is emotional. And see, this is where most people get trapped here, because they're constantly trying to get motivated or stay motivated. And then they beat themselves up when the motivation fades. But they're solving the wrong problem there. The problem is not that you need more motivation. The problem is that you're structuring your behavior around an unreliable emotional state. Sustainable discipline comes from clarity, not emotional highs. Clarity is you see, clarity and internal clarity is, this is who I am. This is what I do. This is how I do it. It's not exciting. It's not inspiring. It's just clear. It's just clarity. You got the Stoics. I mean, I'm going to continue talking about the Stoics because they play a very major part into how I process a lot of this, motivation and discipline. But anyways, you have the Stoics. Seneca, second favorite philosopher, he wrote, "Let us make it our aim to conduct ourselves along the straight path, and to ensure that all our affairs are in harmony with our words. To not let us get motivated, not let us feel inspired. Let us conduct ourselves according to principle, regardless of how we feel." You know, you don't want a mind that acts when emotions are high. What you want is a mind that operates regardless of temporary internal states. When you stop depending on motivation, you stop being a slave to your fluctuating emotional states. You become free. You become reliable. You become someone you can trust. So now a question to leave you with as far as motivation. Are you waiting to feel like trading well? Are you waiting to feel motivated to trade optimally? Or have you accepted that feeling has nothing to do with it? And lastly, what would change if you committed to showing up and executing with excellence regardless of your emotional state here? And so, sorry, I lost my train of thought. But anyways, motivation lives in the mind. Motivation just simply lives in the mind. And anything that lives in the mind, it's bound to fluctuate. So it's unreliable here. So now moving on to identity-based behavior. You see, this is one of the most powerful principles you can understand about human behavior. You act in alignment with who you believe you are. So you got James Clear. He talks about this in Atomic Habits. Maybe some of you have read this. But the concept goes much deeper. Your identity is not just your self-concept. It's the operating system of your behavior. Everything you do either reinforces or contradicts the identity you constructed. Identity drives habits, ladies and gentlemen, not the other way around. Most people try to change their behavior directly. Or I'm going to stop overtrading. I'm going to follow my stops. I'm going to journal consistently. And then they use willpower to force these behaviors, and it works for a while until it doesn't. And the reason why is because they haven't changed their identity. They still see themselves as an impulsive trader who's trying to be disciplined. They still see themselves as someone who struggles with fear, who's trying to be courageous. The behavior is in conflict with the identity, so eventually the identity wins. So when you try to create habits that drive your identity, what James Clear talked about, it was an example he gave, a very great example, is someone who stopped smoking, who's trying to quit smoking. And the way they identify themselves is, oh, I'm trying to quit smoking. Versus the one who actually quits smoking is the person whose identity becomes, oh, I don't smoke. So in relation to trading, it's not, oh, I'm trying to quit overtrading, or I'm going to stop overtrading. It's just, oh, I don't overtrade. That's the identity there. You get me? Y'all following me? But yes. See, this is the difference. This is the difference between I'm trying to lose weight and I'm a healthy person. The first is an attempt to change behavior. I'm trying to lose weight. The second is an actual identity. And the healthy person doesn't struggle to make healthy choices. They just make them. Because that's what healthy people do. Ladies and gentlemen, motivation gets you in the gym. Identity keeps you there for 10 years. That's all I gotta say. No, I ain't done with this slide yet. But yes, motivation gets you into the gym. Identity keeps you there for 10 years. Consistency becomes an expression of self. It's not effort. When you're living in alignment with your identity, consistency is nothing but effortless. Not because it's easy, but because it's congruent. There's no internal conflict. You're not forcing yourself to be someone you're not. You're allowing yourself to be who you've decided to be. Through identity, you shape your habits, you shape your self-talk, your decision patterns, your emotional reactions, even your tolerance for discomfort. And that right there influence your identity-based trading. Which means the system is no longer something you struggle to follow. It becomes an expression of who you are. Execution becomes natural because it aligns with your chosen inner state. And you see how it becomes easy to just simply execute just based off changing your identity. Because your identity drives your habits. So now it's not something you're trying to do. being unfair, not having the fear is not something that you're trying to do. It's something that you just simply are. You just are execution. You're not trying. The market is not out to get you. The market is out to reveal you. You're not forcing discipline. You are the kind of person who behaves with discipline. Understand? So as far as emotional neutrality is one of the highest predictors of consistent trading performance. Emotional neutrality is not numbness. It's not detachment in a cold sense. It's not shutting down from your emotions. Instead, what it actually is equanimity. Or equanimity, I believe. Equanimity. I just learned that one not too long ago. It's non-duality. The quality of remaining centered regardless of external circumstances. Neutrality reduces overreaction to wins and losses. It's simple. If you're neutral, a win is pleasant, but it doesn't inflate you or your ego. A loss, it's unpleasant, but it doesn't deflate you. It doesn't break you down. You remain steady. You remain centered. You remain in that non-duality. You remain in your process. However, for us humans, though, this isn't natural. This isn't a natural thing. We're not primed for this naturally. We're wired to feel good about wins and bad about losses. It's completely normal. But normal doesn't equal optimal, especially in trading. If you want to perform at a high level consistently, you need to train beyond your natural emotional reactivity. Neutrality removes personal meaning from market outcomes. This is important. The market is not personal. It doesn't know you exist. It doesn't care about your hopes, your fears, your need to be right, your need to make money. The market is just doing what it does. But your ego desperately wants to make it personal. Every loss becomes evidence that you're bad at trading. Then every win becomes evidence that you're good at this. Your self-worth swings with your P&L. That goes back to the pendulum I spoke of earlier, and that's the recipe for suffering and inconsistency. But neutrality, ladies and gentlemen, is the state where wins don't inflate you, losses don't diminish you. The market stops being a personal battlefield. The chart just becomes information instead of meaning. When you're neutral, you just follow the system. The system says enter here, you enter. The system says exit here, you exit. There's no drama, there's no story, there's no internal negotiation. Going back to Eckhart Tolle, he had wrote something interesting in The Power of Now. He said acceptance of what is immediately frees you from mind identification and thus reconnects you with being. So essentially, when you accept the market as it is, when you stop arguing with reality, stop wishing it were different, stop needing it to behave a certain way, that's when you become free. Free to see clearly, free to act skillfully, free to remain in your power. From neutrality, decisions become clean here. So yes, as for building your inner framework, understand emotional mastery and discipline are not traits. Emotional mastery and discipline are not traits. They're trained skill sets. Building your inner psychological framework involves awareness practice, emotional regulation, cognitive restructuring, routine development, stress management, self-analysis, reflective analysis, refining behavioral patterns. developing internal consistency. You see, the more you train these skills, the more stable your trading performance becomes. You don't develop the capacity to remain calm under pressure while you're under pressure. You don't learn to process fear while you're in the middle of a losing trade. You don't discover equanimity during a drawdown. You see, these capacities are built in advance. They're trained during the quiet moments. They're developed through practice, repetition, commitment. When the stakes are so low so that they'll be available once the stakes are high. And mind you, these are very important skill sets, as you know and as I know. All of us know these are very important skill sets that allow you to branch off into other fields of life, even just health, wealth, the entire spectrum. Daily awareness practices, for example, they condition your baseline state. What you practice daily becomes your default. If you practice reactivity, if you spend your day scrolling social media, TikTok, Instagram, all that, getting triggered by news, arguing in your head with people who aren't even there, you're training reactivity. Therefore, that's the state you'll be in when you trade. However, if you practice presence, mindfulness, if you meditate, if you do breath work, if you cultivate body awareness, if you train your mind to observe without immediately reacting, that's when you're training presence. And that's the state you'll have access to when you need it. I'm gonna let y'all know right now, this is nothing mystical. This is neuroplasticity here. You're literally rewiring your nervous system through repeated practice here. The patterns you activate most often become the patterns that activate most easily. Damn, I'm realizing this. I've been on here for a minute. But yes, clarity becomes your operating mode over time. Well, clarity becomes your default operating mode over time. And so this is the promise. The promise isn't that you'll never feel fear, greed, frustration, or even impatience, because you will. You're human, it's normal, but over time, with consistent practice, these emotions will no longer control you. They'll no longer have power over you. They'll arise, you'll notice them, you'll let them move through, and you'll act from clarity anyway, despite it. And so that's the path, not perfection, not the elimination of emotion, but simply the development of an internal architecture strong enough to hold any emotion without collapsing, without reacting, without abandoning your principles. And that's why I say, while everybody else is focused on escaping the emotions, I'm focused on developing my capacity to feel all of them, to feel my emotions. This is what you're building toward, not just to be a better trader, but to be a more integrated human being. Because here's the deepest truth. The market is just an arena. The real work is inside you. Everybody wants the shortcut to millions. Nobody wants the long road through their own psychology. And that's why most people stay broke. The treasure requires facing the dragon. And the dragon is you. The real battle is the one between your conditioned reactivity and your conscious awareness. And then every trade is an opportunity to train that. So with all that said, what will you practice today? What will you practice over the weekend? What internal state will you cultivate? What pattern will you strengthen? Because whatever you practice now is who you'll be when it matters most. Remember this. The journey of 1,000 trades begins with a single breath, with a single moment of awareness, with a single choice to remain present instead of reacting. Thing is, that choice is always available. Right here, right now.